Hello, and welcome back to the Children's Corner. Today we are looking at things that are very common and rather small, and yet grow and become quite amazing in God's kingdom. So I like to think of God's kingdom as a place where you find God's love. There he is king. Now I just gotta finish tying my balloon here. There we go. In today's gospel, Jesus once again tells a parable. And if you remember, a parable is a story that teaches us a lesson. Jesus would take objects that people were familiar with, things they understood, to explain things they weren't familiar with, things they didn't understand. So in today's story, Jesus takes two tiny little objects to explain how God's kingdom grows: mustard seeds and yeast. Now, if you go into the store today to buy mustard seed and yeast, this is what it looks like. It was not packaged like that in Jesus' time. People were very familiar of mustard plants when Jesus lived. And he told them, or reminded them, that a mustard seed plant grows from a tiny little seed. Now, I know you can't see these because they're so tiny, but they grow into one of the largest plants in the garden. We're told they grow between 6 to 30 feet tall. And in their leaves, birds like to make their homes. And then Jesus talked about yeast, which is another very common object found in people's homes. Yeast, again, is a teeny tiny little organism. And when you look at it, it looks like fine grains of sand. But when it's dissolved in water and mixed with flour, yeast starts to grow. And then you bake it and it kind of explodes and makes a beautiful loaf of bread. Two small objects that produce something quite large and amazing. So let's look at some other things that may seem, when we first look at them, rather insignificant. Like a baby in a manger. Or the son of a carpenter and a group of fishermen. Or a simple cup of wine and a loaf of bread. Or an insignificant wooden cross. All of these seem like not very important events, but they become life-changing when they become part of God's kingdom. Well, let's look at some other things, like a church in Albany on the corner of Madison and Main, or a group of children in a noisy Sunday school class, or a child walking down the aisle and kneeling in front of the altar and putting out his hands to receive the gifts of God. All of these are parts of God's kingdom. You see, in God's kingdom, we are often found that the most humble places and the least likely people are used to grow God's kingdom. So I'd like to share with you another story this morning. Jesus uses the gifts of a little child to feed a large crowd. All day in the hot sun, thousands of people sat and listened to Jesus talk about God's dream. They were so hungry to know God, they forgot to eat lunch. When the sun started to go down, one of Christ's disciples, Philip, asked, "Master, it's late, and the people are hungry. Shouldn't we send them home?" "Why send them home?" said Jesus. "Just feed them." "Feed them," Philip said. "We don't have any food." "Someone has something to share," Jesus answered. a little boy offered to share his 5 small loaves of bread and 2 tiny fish. Philip threw his arms up in the air. That's not enough to feed all these people. Ask the people to sit down, Jesus said. He took the bread in his hands, looked up to heaven, and blessed it. And he did the same with the fish. Then he told the disciples to hand out the food. They were amazed. There was more than enough for everyone. When all the people had finished eating, the disciples filled 12 baskets with food that was left. You see, with God's love, 5 loaves and 2 small fishes could feed 5,000 people. So, I guess we've learned that size does not matter in God's kingdom. We are never too small to be important in God's eyes. Our acts of love, no matter how small or perhaps insignificant we may think they are, can be used in God to grow God's kingdom. So let's end with a little prayer this morning. Dear God, thank you for letting me be part of your dream. Thank you for taking my small acts and making them holy. Amen.